My name is Juliana Nykolaiszyn with the Oklahoma State University Library. Today is Friday, February 22nd, 2008, and I am in Tulsa, Oklahoma interviewing Betty Boyd. This interview is being conducted as part of the inductees of the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame Oral History Project. Betty Boyd was inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame in 1996. For over 25 years, Boyd served as a friendly face on Tulsa television at stations KOTV and later KTUL. After working in broadcasting and marketing, Boyd turned to politics and was elected to the Oklahoma House of Representatives in 1990 and served through the year 2000. Thank you for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for asking me.
Well, let's begin by learning a little bit about your early life. Could you tell us where you grew up?
Yes, about 2 miles from where you're sitting now. I was born in Tulsa and have always lived here up to this point and don't plan to go anywhere else. Went to Pershing Elementary School, which is no more. It's not a school anymore. Went to Roosevelt Junior High School, which is now an elementary school. Graduated from Tulsa Central High School, which has moved from its downtown location. So all my schools have been displaced except the University of Tulsa and Iowa State University at Ames. Grew up with being raised basically by 6 women, no men in my life at all. I haven't had a dad since I was less than a year old, and mother never remarried, so my mother, my grandmother, and her 5 unmarried sisters all thought they were my mothers, and this was fine. Loved to read as a child. My mother could have taught this table to read, so I was exposed to reading, although she was not my teacher ever. She did not wish to do that or even teach at the same school where I would be attending. Didn't think that was good. But I love to read, partly because I guess when you're raised by women, you don't do a lot of the things you do when you're raised with a man in the house. We never went camping. I still consider camping out, going barefoot in the Holiday Inn. So, I just I didn't do a lot of things, but I did love to read. I was not well as a child at all, and so I had to sit still a lot. And read and had a good childhood. I was born an adult and stayed that way, I guess. Had a good childhood. Loved living in Tulsa. Never have wanted to live anywhere but here. Love to travel now, but I want to live here.
When you were younger, what were some of your favorite subjects in school?
Well, anything but math. Is that a shock? I always do creative math. I consider if I get 5 when I add 2 and 2, that's creative. My teacher said it was wrong. Let me think. I've always been interested in history. Everything I like to read all kinds of books, but the things I most particularly have always enjoyed are either history, nonfiction, or a lot of the nonfiction seems like fiction, or historical novels or this kind of thing. I'm a real history buff and always have been, so I suppose like most other little girls in pink dresses and straight stringy hair, enjoyed reading. So I enjoyed English, I enjoyed history, I enjoyed science. I wasn't good at art, so I really didn't enjoy that. Love to give book reports, love to get up in front of a crowd and speak, although I was and am bashful. Probably because I was an only child in a house full of grown-ups. So I've just been bashful.
Well, when you were younger, did you have any hopes or dreams or ideas as to what you wanted to be when you grew up?
Yes. In fact, that's why I went to university where I went. I wanted to write. I knew that. I loved journalism when I got to that point in school. In junior high, we had a junior high school paper at that time, school paper. And I loved writing for that kind of writing, not books, although I've done that some since, but So I wanted to be an editor of Better Homes and Gardens, or a magazine much like that, because I was also very interested in home economics, for good reason, by the way. But I thought if I took the combination of home economics and technical journalism, I would get the best of both my worlds. Got married instead and got an even better world. So I never did do that, but I wanted to be a journalist, but not for a newspaper. And of course, when I was growing up, it's obvious there was no such thing as television. There was radio. We didn't listen on crystal sets or anything, but we were a little advanced by the time I came around. But so I had no thought of that, and I certainly had no thought of going into public life and politics, although I love history. But I just, bashful, told you.
Now you said, for some reason, home economics. Why was home economics important to you?
One of these aunties who lived in the home with me, my mother, my grandmother, and this aunt, and I all lived together in a house here in Tulsa. The other aunties lived in Missouri, but were here a lot, and so helped raise me. But the auntie who lived in this house was a professional dietitian. And she, in fact, is the lady who later went to Columbia University at the request of the Raytheon Corporation to teach their engineers what to do with this thing they had that would cook, but they didn't know what kind of recipes to use, how much water or liquid to use, if any, what kind of spices, how long it would take. Aunt Margaret went to Columbia in New York City, where she had gotten her master's degree, and taught the Raytheon Corporation what to do with the now microwave oven that's in 90% of American homes, they tell me. And so I always grew up around somebody that liked that end of this world. I didn't want to teach. My mother and all my other aunties were teachers, and I saw what low salaries they had, wonderful rewards otherwise, but I'm too much of a gypsy. I wasn't sure I wanted to go in a classroom at 8 in the morning and not come out until 4 in the afternoon or 3 in the afternoon. I wanted to run around and talk to people like you, and even though I'm bashful, I still wanted to do that. And the home ec part came from Aunt Margaret's influence, I'm sure, and all my family. I grew up in a household of the best cooks in the world, so why not?
Are you a good cook?
Yes. I'm not bashful about that. Yes. I still am, even though now I just cook for me. I don't enjoy that as much as when I have my family over. And incidentally, all my family now live here. My 2 children, their children, and their grandchildren all live here except for one. I don't know how he got away, but he moved to Florida a few years ago. But the rest of them all live here.
Was your family very supportive when it came time for you to go to college? Did they encourage education?
Oh my, yes. Remember, I'm an old broad, and my mother was not young when she married, nor young when she had me. And she, and like I said, all these aunts were in some way connected with a school, and Aunt Margaret later with the university, very strongly. But everybody, there was no question that I was going on for advanced education. There was some question when I wanted to get married before I finished school, but that was okay. They were extremely supportive, because in that day it was a little unusual for women to have a degree, much less an advanced degree, and all but 2 of these aunties had master's degrees and were working on others later. I didn't ever have any PhDs or EDDs in the family, which didn't seem important to them, but they still continued to go to summer school.
Mm-hmm. Now you started out here at the University of Tulsa?
Yes, because when I got out of high school at just barely 16, my mother said I couldn't go farther than across town on the bus to school. At University of Tulsa didn't offer the combination I mentioned earlier about technical journalism and home ec. They had no home ec department. They had a journalism department, but they were training newspaper type people, city paper type people. But I did go there as a freshman. There were only 2 schools that offered what I wanted to take, that combination. One was Oklahoma A&M, now OSU, and the other one was Iowa State. And no, Stillwater didn't then. I beg your pardon. It was Iowa State and Cornell University in New York. OSU had a good home ec department, but they didn't have that combination. Did that wrong. Mother said you can never go to Cornell. Now, I don't know why, because she received her master's from Columbia University in New York also, but she said, no, that's too far away. But if you will go to the University of Tulsa 1 year, we'll talk about Iowa State. We did. I did. And then I got married.
Did you meet your husband in Tulsa?
Yes. He also went to Central High School, but he was a couple years ahead of me, and Central High School in Tulsa was so huge. Although I knew a lot of people there, no one knew I was anything but part of the wall. I was very young when I went to Central and not interested in boys. Never had been around boys in the first place. I thought they were just ornery things that were around for some reason. But I just started there very young, and so he didn't know me, I knew him, but I met him on the bus coming from the University of Tulsa back to town, to Tulsa. One day we were both out there.
Were you married when you went to Iowa State?
No, I was just 17 when I went to Iowa State that second year, so no. But I was married at 18 and a half.
Was Iowa much different than Oklahoma?
Not today. It's cold. This day in February when we're doing this is cold. Yes, it was. In fact, it started snowing. That first year it started snowing in October, and we had snow on the ground. I don't mean it snowed every day, but like this much snow, not just this much. We had snow on the ground every day through March, and this was highly unusual. No one could have a car on campus. And the campus there is beautiful, but it's very hilly. And I remember sliding up and down hills in my little shoes I'd been to a formal dance in many times, and wearing everything we could get our hands on. It's cold in Iowa.
Now, after Iowa, walk me through
what happened then.
Yes.
When I went to Iowa State, it was in the fall of 1942, and 43. If you remember, in the winter of 42, something rather traumatic happened in this country as far as World War II was concerned. That summer, the fellow that I had learned to care for very much, who became my husband later, enlisted in the United States Air Force. And that fall, I went to Iowa to school. I stayed there for a year, and the following summer of 1943, he and I were married. We got engaged that summer, and he graduated with his wings. He was a pilot of a B-24 4-engine bomber. And about 3 months after we were married, he went overseas, was based in Italy, and flew 50 missions in that B-24 and came home, fortunately, and was fine until 4 years later when he and our daughter had polio. And that was another story, but not too spiffy. But we did meet at the University of Tulsa. Then he went to the Air Force and I went to Iowa State, and then we got married. And then after he got out of the service, we did go back to the University of Tulsa together. Because that's where he wanted to go. He was taking engineering and he wanted to go there, and I never was, and I'm still not liberated enough to rent in the house and say, "Oh honey, I'm going here, are you going with me?" I'm not, although I grew up where all women worked, and I guess I was thought of as a liberated sort of person, but I'm really not. I'm just not. So I wasn't going to do that, and if he wanted to go to TU, I did too. Then we had a child. After we'd been married, let me think, 3 years, I guess, 3 years, we had our little girl, and then the following summer she and her daddy both had polio, and he was totally paralyzed for quite a while.
Well, we'll get back to that in a second. I want to go back to the war years for a second. I read somewhere that during World War II you worked in a Tulsa bomber plant.
Yes.
Tell me a little bit about that.
Well, I needed to do something. My husband was overseas, and at that point I really didn't want to go back to the university. I knew probably that he and I would go back when he came back, and I felt very confident he'd come back. By the way, I held that thought. I'm kind of a positive person, and I held that thought always. But so I wanted to do something. I wasn't going to just sit at home and do nothing. And although as an officer in the Air Force, he was making pretty good money, but I wanted to do something. So, like a lot of other people, I applied at Douglas, which is now the Tulsa. Well, let's see, it's been several things. It's that big long building out by the airport, and it was huge to me as a little old gal at that time. And so I applied. Now I wasn't Rosie the Riveter. I worked in the office. But I did work the swing shift, which meant I went to work at 3 in the afternoon and worked until midnight, which was fine. I wasn't going to date or go partying anyway. My husband of a few months was overseas. I wasn't going to go do that. So I did work out there, but I worked in the office. Enjoyed it. It was exciting for me to be a part of the war effort in that way. Little as it may have seemed, it still was my contribution. But I wasn't on the assembly line or anything. I worked in the office. I wasn't that aggressive. I didn't do that.
But you contributed nevertheless.
That's right.
Now in the 40s you worked with the March of Dimes.
Yes. You do know a lot about me.
What was your role with them?
Well, I started that because I mentioned my husband had polio and my daughter. And at that time, he was back at the University of Tulsa, and our only income was because he was getting money on the GI Bill to go to school, and you got a little stipend in addition to getting your tuition and books paid. Well, when he was totally paralyzed in the hospital, that ceased to be. I had a little girl at home who was just a year old at that point. Also, I was the family dummy and didn't really know how to really make a living for everybody, but I needed to stay hitched pretty well to the hospital and with Bill. He was there for about a year and a half, and our little girl needed my care, so I thought, well, I'll just be a homebody, but we can't pay these bills, huge bills. And the March of Dimes came to Bill and me and said, we want to pay your bills. That's our role. At this point, the March of Dimes was doing that sort of thing only. They have another mission now, but you don't have to pay us back. Well, as a matter of fact, Bill's folks did pay them back eventually, but nobody asked them to. They didn't have to. But I still wanted to do something for them. And I thought, well, I like to speak, and so I kind of got on the speaker circuit of going around to women's meetings mainly, PTAs, garden clubs, anybody that would have me, and talk to them about what to look for as signs of possible polio, how to possibly avoid. Remember, this is before any vaccine at this point, because it was 1948, and Jonas Salk's name wasn't even familiar to anybody at that point. So I went around telling people how to keep their kiddos from being as exposed, and because they closed school here for months at a time, and you weren't supposed to go to movies or anything where you'd be in a crowd. Don't go swimming. I mean, there are lots of do's and don'ts. Did that, and then when Jonas Salk came out with his trial vaccine, Tulsa was one of the places that did the trial. But we had to talk parents of second grade children into letting those children do that, take part in it. So I continued to speak on behalf of the March of Dimes then. And then later I was on the local Chapter executive staff, the state chairman, and then I was on the national volunteer board of the March of Dimes, and so that's how I started meeting a lot of the people that I came to love very much. Dr. Salk was just, right up here for me, and Beverly Sills, who was very active in the March of Dimes then, and I worked together, and people like a little old girl from Tulsa thought she'd just always read about, not ever meet. So it was quite an experience, but that's how I really got started in everything I've done since, was because of my volunteer work with the March of Dimes.
Really? So did that lead into your television career?
I had a friend who was working in the promotion department at Channel 6, and she called me one day and she said, I know you have been giving lots of talks, which I had for several years. Our woman's broadcaster's leaving. She's leaving, getting married and moving. Wouldn't you like to come audition for her show? And I said, heavens no, when? I knew nothing about television at all, or radio. I'd never been in either one. And as I've told you, I'm bashful. So I did go down and I did an audition. I said, well, what do you want me to do here? And she said, oh, talk about anything you want to and then sell something for a minute. So I did. At that point, my husband was working with Kerglass and Sand Springs, and he had me convinced that you could not possibly can vegetables and fruits without using the wonderful gray sealing compound around the seal of a Kerglass jar. So I sold a Kerglass jar. The next day they said, come back and do a live on the air show as a live audition. And after I got through losing my breakfast, I did that. Somebody else did the same sort of thing the next day, but I don't know whether she died or left town or what, but I got the job. And it was just because this friend of mine knew that I had given lots of talks on behalf of the March of Dimes. And so I always like to tell youngsters today, don't fail to volunteer for anything you can. Just doing that is way plenty for you in satisfaction, but it might lead you to the most wonderful job anybody could ever have. And sure enough, it did.
Now, after your first audition, you were hired. Do you remember your first time in front of the camera?
Oh, yeah.
Tell me about it.
Well, of course, the first time was the audition. It was the live audition. They meant a live on-the-air show that was sandwiched in between a local news program and a national soap opera, which meant we had to join network right on the dot. There was none of this lag time or anything that television was kind of used to in the early days when national television wasn't, such a big deal. So they gave me, at that time they said, bring your own guest. Well, fortunately for me, this is one reason I remember the first time really, this aunt I mentioned who did the microwave cooking research was here for the whole month of December as a holiday for her. And I said, Aunt Margaret, guess where we're going in the morning? She said, I don't know. And I said, you're going to be on television with me. And she didn't know any more about television than I did. She knew about microwave. And the fact that the television and microwave ovens both ran on the same sort of a Megatron tube. That's about it. But she knew her business, and I was fascinated by microwave cooking. I just couldn't believe that a potato could bake in just a few minutes and be done, or that a cake, I could look in there and see it go up, So she was my first guest, but I really did lose my breakfast for several days. It was scary. I'd talked to rooms full of people, but I'd never talked to a thing like that without any response. I can't tell if I need to say something funny when I'm talking to that. I can when I'm talking to you, or if I need to be quiet or be loud or what, where you can with a live audience. So yeah, I was scared. And I did toss my cookies before I went on the air, but then I interviewed Aunt Margaret and did 2 or 3 commercials after that. They loaded my show, so I did 2 or 3 interviews in every 15-minute show, plus 4 or 5 commercials in every show, and I did all the commercials live. In fact, I always did television live and liked it. But yeah, it was. Yes, I do remember vividly.
Now, nowadays we have teleprompters and pre-taping, and not a whole lot is done live except for maybe the news now. Is live television hard? Did you have scripts in front of you?
Yes and no. Yes, well, it is more difficult because you can't have overs. When tape came along, all we had when I started was film, and the only reason they used film was on a news story with limited use then because it was very expensive. You use film once and throw it away. That's a pretty expensive process. So until videotape came along, everything was live except for a few news film clips. And once in a while, in my role at the station, I would go do an opening night at Tulsa Opera or something of that sort that was community-based, but it was also newsworthy. So because the wife of the editor of the Tulsa World had to be one of the guests, so it was newsworthy. But until then, everything was done live. It was hard, yes, because you couldn't do it over. If you made a mistake, you just flat made a mistake and it hung out there for everybody to see and hear. And I made some doozies. But, and things unexpected happen. Funniest stories that I ever have told people about television days are the unexpected things that happen to us on the air live. But live television is exciting because it's there, it's real, you know it's real, and you just have a rapport with that funny looking thing out there, and you pretend like you can see all of those millions of people you are absolutely sure are watching. So I prefer live, always did, always will. I do think you can do a more perfect job if you can take 16 times to do a 30-second commercial, for instance, to get it just right the way they want it. But there's just something about doing it live. It's like living life. I want to do it in person. I don't just want somebody to tell me it was nice, you know.
Do you remember some of those old products you used to pitch?
Oh, sure.
What were some of them?
Oh, all the Wilson meat products, for instance, bacon, ham. I suppose that was typecasting. I remember Maxwell House coffee. I also remember much of what I did in the way of commercials on my show were things that were local because it was a local show about local people and visiting guests. In fact, I wrote down a list not too long ago of all the guests that I could remember that I've had, and it took up about 4 pages, and I thought, good heavens, how could I be that lucky, you know? I told you I was part of the wall in high school. Well, I was, and I kind of still am, but I just was lucky because of what I was doing to meet all of these wonderful people. But that's what my show was really about, was local things. So we had a lot of local advertisers. All of the local department stores here would advertise things. But in all of that time that I was on television, and still today when I do commercials occasionally, nobody has ever asked me to do anything that wasn't the best or the best price. And sometimes those are different things. But I was never asked to. I guess no one would have believed me if I had told them to buy something or to use something that wasn't okie doke, because I'm believable as one kind of person, but I'm not a tire kicker or a fender banger. I'm just not that kind of a person, and it's pretty obvious, I guess.
Do you have a favorite moment from your television days you'd like to share with us?
I have favorite moments.
Well, tell us some. That's fine.
Most of them are surrounding something that was totally unexpected to me. One day, I asked a lady, remember I'm doing all these live now, I asked a lady a question and she went, And I thought, good lands, I've killed her. But she had fainted. I guess she was so frightened, although most of my guests normally were not. By the time we got in the studio, I'd always meet them in the lobby, and we wouldn't talk about what we were going to talk about on the air, because if you do that, and then you ask them that on the air, they think, well, I've already answered that, and they get this look on their face. So, but they usually were pretty comfortable. But this lady, for some reason, was uptight, and she just flat fainted right on the air. Well, that was, in that way, a favorite moment. Another favorite moment was when I had, and it was funny, I had a little lady on who was talking about a county fair that they were holding, not the state fair, but a county fair. And she was darling. As I remember her, she was about the age I am now, which is pretty old. And she had a little hat on, reminded me of Mary Poppins. I expected it had a flower on it. I don't know that for sure, but it was a little flat hat. And she was so dear and so precious, and she made rugs. And so she was talking about this county fair and her part in it and so forth. And I said, well, Mrs. So-and-so, how long have you been making rugs? And this darling, sweet little lady looked at me and said, oh, honey, I've been a hooker all my life. Well, you know, you can't come unglued when you're on live. When the lady fainted, I just let the cameraman pick her up, chair and all, and carry her off. And I went on doing my job. They were doing theirs. I learned a long time ago that if you do your job and depend on other people to do what they're supposed to do, it'll happen. And then when this happened, I couldn't just fall apart with laughter with this lady, but I could see the cameraman and the camera going like this because they were laughing so hard. And she looked at me and went on with it and said, well, my mother taught me to be a hooker when I was just a little girl. Well, it just went downhill from there. But actually, favorite moments have to revolve around the people who came to be interviewed. And I was just as entranced and enthralled, honest to Pete, with people from here, and by here I mean across the state of Oklahoma, who would come to talk about their projects. But my favorite dear moment, one day I had a therapist and one of her little clients about yay tall, probably about 4 years old, from the Speech and Hearing Association. And this little child had been profoundly deaf all its life. And it was a darling little boy. Just darling. Of course, all little boys are darling. I found out later after I started having him. But he had not spoken because of his deafness. And she was demonstrating with a feather in her hand here to teach him to say mother. Give him this action. If you're deaf and haven't heard, it's difficult, as Helen Keller showed all of us. And he was sitting on set with her, and Mama was back in a chair off camera. And the therapist is trying to get him to do this by blowing the feather, the feather. And he looked at her in these eyes, and I swear they were this big, and they were beautiful blue eyes. And he said, mother. And his mother jumped up out of the chair in the back of the room there and just, ah! And that probably, without doubt, was my dearest moment, that I saw this little boy who had never spoken his mother's mother name do it on the air. And that there were just lots of things like that. I'm a schmaltzy little old lady, and I like things like that. But it's all been fun. It was all fun. In fact, I've never done anything that wasn't fun. Some things I like better than others. I obviously don't balance my bank book. I told you I didn't like math, and I still don't find that fun. But any work that I've ever done, I like. And it's full of memories. The whole thing is full of memories.
What was your last day on full-time TV like? I know you've had stints since.
I can't tell you what that show was about. I can tell you that the people at Channel 8, where I was at that point, KTUL TV, were wonderful to me, and I was not fired. I left under my own steam because I really wanted to do something else and had another, what I considered plum job. People said, oh, you're leaving the best job in town. Well, yeah, probably, but I was also going to the best job in town. So it wasn't a sad thing for me to leave because I was going someplace I wanted to really go, to do something entirely different. I was going to be the Public Relations and Marketing Director for the Tulsa Technology District. And of course, our career tech system here in Oklahoma is wonderful, and I had always wanted to do that and had interviewed their superintendent several times, and in our off-camera conversation had said to him, if your PR gal ever decides to retire, I want to apply for that job. And he thought I was kidding. Well, I wasn't kidding at all. I really wanted to do that. I'm back to my journalism again. Not home economics, but back to my journalism. And I had done television for 25 years at that point, every day, every holiday, all the time, because I always did it live. Except when I did finally take a vacation and they let me pre-tape the shows I had, but I was still doing it. So for 25 years, every day, I had done television, and I wanted to do something different. So I wasn't unhappy about leaving, not at all. If I'd been fired, I'd have been, I don't know if I'd been unhappy or just mad, but I wasn't unhappy. I was happy to be going where I was going. Just like when I left there after 10 years, when I left Tulsa Tech, I left there because I had gotten elected to the legislature and I couldn't hold both jobs because they were both paid partially by the state government. Couldn't do that, and I wasn't unhappy about that because I didn't get fired there either. Finally got fired from the legislature when somebody beat me after 10 years, but I was never unhappy about leaving, so I can't know. Long answer, short question. I cannot remember my last day, except I know it was joyous, happy, and we had a lot of fun, and they gave me a lot of plunder when the day I left, and a big tape that they had put together of a lot of the shows that I had done at Channel 8 and that kind of thing.
Well, moving to the Tulsa Tech District, tell me about some of your daily activities working in that role.
What anybody else does in public relations and marketing. The image of, it was called vocational technical education at that time. We were Tulsa VOTEC instead of Career Tech. Nationally, that name has changed for all schools like this. So I did whatever you would do in any other industry to try to promote the school. Wrote articles, prepared all of the promotional materials, had a great rapport with the kiddos and the instructors, because here again, it was all positive. It was something that they wanted to have happen, but vocational education was not thought of as for, everybody said, oh, isn't that wonderful? For everybody but my child. My child's going to college. Well, what we had to sell people on in those days was that even if you were going, your youngster was planning to go on to college or university or for post-secondary education of some sort, that was good. Even so, they could get good background, good platform from which to spring, and perhaps a way to help make part of their tuition money for college. Well, of course, now we even give concurrent enrollment, so that's all changed today. And I'm on their school board now, and I can tell you it has changed dramatically since the days that I was there. And we tried to make people understand that vocational education isn't just for those who can't do something you consider pretty spiffy. It's for those who are trained in a different way, those who generally learn more by doing than just by sitting down and reading about doing. They live more in the real world when they're in school than those who don't have that experience. So it was a sell job. So I did the things that anybody else that was trying to sell an idea, try to upgrade and dignify more, and a way of education, and try to prove to people that one size doesn't fit all in education. It doesn't. It still doesn't. It doesn't today. So that my daily activities were just as what anybody else would do. A promoter, an informer of, of opportunities and this kind of thing. And I loved it, just loved it. Got to use my journalism skills again, or whatever they are, I guess they're skills, quite a bit, and photography, and did that a lot, which I had never really done before, except just for my own amazement. So.
Well, how did politics enter the picture?
Well, the man who had the seat that I eventually held in the House of Representatives moved out of the district and also decided to run for the Senate about that time. And he called me one day just before filing time was over in the summer of 1990 and said, "I'm leaving this House seat. Why don't you file for it?" And I about fell out of my chair. I was like I was about, why don't you audition for television? I'd never ever thought about being in politics. Never, all those years I had a show, didn't have confrontation on it. If people were against, let's take the ERA, that was going on, trying to ratify the ERA for the state of Oklahoma. Those for and those against were never on my show on the same day. I'd have them both. But I don't like people sitting on radio or television yelling at each other about something. Nobody benefits. You don't do anything, you don't even listen to what the other person's saying. I don't like that, but I wanted both sides. I never put a political sign in my yard as long as I was on television. I couldn't have a public opinion about a private subject. That's just not what you do. So I never, ever thought about being in politics, just like I never, ever thought about being in television. But I did, and I can't tell you what made me decide to, yes I can. My nice husband said, "You'd be good at that." Of course, that ornery pothound, we were in different political parties, and we did take a lot of teasing about having a mixed marriage. He was a very active member of his party. I was not a very active member of my party. But we were registered in different parties on purpose so we could go to all the precinct meetings, vote in both primaries, and then when it came to the general election, be very independent and voted for whomever we wished, regardless of party, which we both did. Or he said he did. I didn't go in the booth with him, but I'm sure he did, and I did. And I'm sure he did too. But anyway, so I thought, for whatever reason, he just said, "Well, you'd be good at that." And he had said that to me about television. He's really kind of pushed me into both of these things. So I filed, and I had 4 opponents in that primary, but I came out of it without a runoff. And then I had a general election against a member of the other party and won that. And it just started, and I found out that legislative work, policymaking, is my real thing. I still would miss it if I were not on the school board, because we make policy. That's what school board members do. They make policy. The school superintendent and his staff carry it out, but the board makes the policy. I like policy making, and I love the legislature. Obviously I like to talk, so I like to debate. I don't want to yell. I don't want to do that. Yeah, I can get angry, but I still don't want to yell about it. And I don't want anybody yelling at me or, calling me names or anything. That's not statesmanship. But taking the best of this and the best of this and putting it to this so that you have something that you can really applaud over, that's statesmanship, and that's what I like to do, I found out. Still like it.
What were some of the issues that you were really passionate about when you were serving
in the legislature?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I was not only passionate about, but most noted for, I guess, if noted is the right word. Those who didn't like the legislation didn't think I was noted. They thought I was nuts, but that's okay. Or I started the Reading Sufficiency Act, which at that point, although it's been modified several times with different aspects, improved in some ways and not in others. But it was insistent that if children didn't learn to read early, they must learn to, let's put it positively, children must learn to read and read well early in their school life, or they're probably going to be a candidate to drop out later, because you don't do well at anything if you don't have a good base in reading. So the Reading Sufficiency Act was even copied as a national model. I liked that. I set up the Department of Rehabilitation Services as a separate agency because they were in DHS, and DHS had so many things under its umbrella that they needed to be. Rehabilitative needs are a little different than entitlement needs are. So we set that up, and that I liked that. Did a lot of work with the disabled folks, a lot of work with education. Started this school. I carried the House version of OSU Tulsa to establish this school, this university here in Tulsa. Pleased about that. Did a lot of work with the medical communities, a lot of breast cancer work. Set up the breast cancer fund, a revolving fund to assist women who were either uninsured or underinsured, and raise the awareness of the necessity for having early detection of any kind of cancer, but most particularly at that point the breast cancer fund. And that was highly successful and very emotional. And so health, education, the welfare of people, those were my general thing. I know nothing about agriculture. I was born in the middle of downtown Tulsa, so practically, so I know nothing about agriculture, so to speak. I'm not stupid, but that's not my thing. Obviously, I'm not very astute about banking and finance. I know nothing about the insurance agency except that I carry it, and I need it and all this. So there were several subjects that I participated in by voting, because you have to learn about them and vote, but they were not the things I was passionate about. It was the education of our children and lifelong learning, and it was those who had rehabilitative needs or had special needs, we'll say, children, anything to do with children, early education or the abolishment of child abuse in as much as is possible and this kind of thing. Those were my really favorite things, along with helping the Oklahoma Medical Association with many projects, particularly in the cancer field. That was about it.
It's pretty good for 10 years.
Yeah, they were full, and I never lost a bill, ever. And I was pretty pleased about that. I was very lucky in many respects, I'm sure, but when you're a wife, and I was the first great-grandmother to ever serve in the Oklahoma House of Representatives, and I was a great-grandmother at that time. So I thought that was pretty nice. Age, your effectiveness doesn't necessarily depend on your age or your gender. It doesn't. When I went over there were only 5 women in the House of 101. Only 5 women, and I wasn't there because I was a woman. I was just there because I got elected. So I never felt discriminated against. One little reporter one day said, "Well, are you going to play in the golf tournament that the fellows are having?" And I said, "No, I'm not." "Well, didn't they invite you?" And I said, "Well, I don't play golf. That's why I'm not going. If I hit something and chase it myself, you're going to have to put me in the funny farm. I just don't do that." So that's why. But people thought that women were, no, I didn't have any problem that way. In the first place, I was enough of a grandma, I'd have paddled them if they'd done that, but corporal punishment or not. But I never felt looked down on or put upon because of that, but I never expected any special privilege. But I knew how to debate, and I did my homework on my stuff, and I carried good measures, or I wouldn't have carried them. And I was proud of that. And I'm sorry if that seems pride-filled, but I was very proud of never having lost a bill when I was the 10 years I was in the House. And I carried a lot of measures. Not the first year. The first year I sat and learned. But beyond that, I carried a lot of stuff. But it was all good enough to pass.
Do you have that one and or several moments that just really stick out for you during your time in the legislature?
Well, the one was the day we had the debate on the breast cancer fund. Normally, even old Frosty Troy commented on this one up in the press box. Normally, the House is a little rowdy. In the first place, most of them aren't paying a lot of attention because a lot of them have read the bills already, so they don't have to pay attention to the questions and not even to the debate. A lot of them get up and go out to meet with constituents in the hall while somebody's talking or debating or something. This particular day, when the breast cancer thing came up, it was as though the old thing about you could drop a pin and hear it in the next room. It was so quiet. It was almost a reverent experience, really, because there was one man in the House who was bound and determined that that was not going to pass because abortion caused breast cancer, which he told me on the floor of the House when I was explaining my bill and what it was for. And it just made me do this, well, because they knew on the House floor that I had had breast cancer twice. In fact, I had it once while I was down there, and one of my episodes was while I was in the legislature. So they knew I was going down to take radiation every day before I came in to go to work at the House. They knew I was passionate about it, and here this yahoo got up and started yammering about things that had nothing, really, that wasn't his only thing, but you know, if women behaved themselves, they wouldn't have breast cancer and all this kind of junk. Well, they asked who wanted to debate this bill, and this man held up his hand. He wanted to debate against it, and almost everybody else in that room raised their hands. They wanted to debate for the bill. Well, that in itself was a shocker to me. I knew I'd have some good supporters, but almost every person in that room wanted to debate for the bill, and that was, you know, enough, really. But then when the debate happened, it was so quiet, it was almost scary. People listened to every single word that was said passionately by many of these people who had had family members or good acquaintances who had had breast cancer. And they related part of what they'd gone through, but most of all, why this was so necessary. And I will never forget the reverence, really, in the attitude of that whole House during that particular debate. And it was and is very dear to me. And I appreciate it. Of course, I loved all these old guys anyhow, but even that one over there that was giving me trouble. But that's something you never forget. Not just because other people in the room were seeing a subject the way I saw it, but just because of their total involvement and acceptance of the situation and why it needed to be fixed insofar as it could be. It was wonderful, just wonderful. That's my big moment in the House.
Based on all of the careers you've been involved with, from mother to television broadcaster to marketing guru to community member involved in many activities, can you go into detail about a key moment that you consider one of your biggest highlights?
That's hard. I told you I liked it all, and I still do. My memory bank is so full, it's just unreal of all of them. They haven't all been great, good, and wonderful. I remember the icky ones too. And they've been, when you're in public life, and I've been in public life all my life, really, people are going to feel very free to criticize just as well as they applaud. And I remember those moments too, and I try not to make those my priority moments, but they're always stuck in here somehow when somebody says something real tacky about what you're doing or what you believe or your opinion is wrong. No, that's still my opinion. You may not agree with it, but it isn't wrong. That is still my opinion of something. But they're very free to tell you this, so I don't want to make anything of that sort my moment that I remember, but those are moments you can't forget. You simply cannot erase those. You can overcome them, and of course the good has been way ahead of the obnoxious. Really, I cannot pick out a moment, and I could not tell you one of those careers that was better than any other, except, and I'm not blowing smoke, I mean this, my family, regardless of all these careers, my family has been at the center of my life. I'm a good cook, told you that. Love to cook for my kids. Went to every activity they were ever in, and the grandchildren as well, and the great-grandchildren now. I still go to all these elementary school little plays and the junior high school band concerts that they're in, and watch them cheerlead and play football and get smashed and all that stuff. My family really is at the center of everything I ever did, and my support came from there, first of all, because they all had to participate. When you're on television, your kids have to participate by being better children than they might have thought about being. They couldn't go out and go speeding up and down the street, and they can't do that if they're in the family of anybody in public life. You don't do that. You're not supposed to anyway, but you really can't do that. And I don't care what I have done, it's been pretty public. I don't think I have a secret in the world from anybody who lives here. I just don't. And well, maybe one or two. But you can't have. And you can't have if you're in politics. Somebody will dig it out. Mm-hmm. You can't do the things that you might have done. But my family always kept me on an even keel, and they always brought me back to reality. Oh, Mom, go sell a hot dog at the football game or something, you know, that kind of thing. And they always kept me well centered. When I'd get down, my wonderful husband, who really supported me always, and I'm sure he got tired of being called Mr. Betty Boyd. I'm sure of that, because I'm just sure. But he never really let it show that he kind of resented that. But we all have egos, and we like to be recognized for what we are. But he always promoted, you can do that, Betty. You're ready to do that. It's fine to do that. Because I didn't stand in the corner with my thumb in my mouth, but I was always kind of bashful about, especially trying something new. So family it's got to be my whole center point. Other than that, all the memories are wonderful, but they all kind of get glued together.
Now, you've pioneered television, you entered the legislature later in life, you've done a lot of key things. Tell me about any stumbling blocks or adversity that you faced along the way, if any.
Oh, most of them were within myself. And here again, it comes from that business of being a timid, bashful, loner child. Being an only child is something different, and particularly when everybody else is going to the father and daughter banquet and you're not going because you don't have a dad. I guess it has been a stumbling block for me, just to get over the fact that, yeah, you can do this, and if you make a boo-boo, it's okay. I don't like to make boo-boos, that's why I collect them. I have a whole collection of boo-boos because I make so many, and I think it's great when somebody else makes one, so I have a whole collection of them. But I don't want to make an error. I don't think I need to be perfect, but I don't want to make an error, mainly because I don't want to make anybody mad. I'm not good at that, although there are those who will argue with you because I am not bashful about expressing my opinion on something if I feel strongly about it. This I'm not, but learning to control my opinions and listen to other people. Listening to other people is no problem to me, but learning to take the value of their opinion and not adopting it necessarily. I still have my strong opinions, but that's a stumbling block to me. I always want to be right, not because I think my opposition doesn't know anything, but I want to be right. And that's a stumbling block when you have that. I think people want to be too perfect, too good, It was a little difficult when I went to the legislature because I couldn't find a place to park, because the sergeants would always, for the first about month, they would come up to the side of the car in the parking lot and say, "I'm sorry, ma'am, these spaces are reserved for legislators." Well, I qualify. Is your husband in the legislature? No, I am. That it has been a stumbling block being a woman in some of the things I've done, because when I started in television, there were almost no women in television. Almost none at all. None on the news. And almost none. Anyway, when I started in the legislature, there were almost none. None that were from out of town anyway. The ones that were there all lived around the Oklahoma City area. That has been a stumbling block, but I think the biggest stumbling block just has been to convince myself I could do whatever it was they'd hired me to do. I still do a lot of public speaking every week, but I always think, gosh, I hope I say what they want me to. I lack some confidence, so any stumbling blocks I've really had have been from lack of confidence in here. I haven't had any major flops, except not winning an election, but I didn't throw that all on my shoulders. But I really haven't had that many stumbling blocks. I've had that much encouragement to get over whatever I thought might keep me from doing what I wanted to do. So I guess and that's not to say my life's been perfect, but I just haven't had the big, I've never been rich, so that, I've never been pretty, so that, I don't have to get over those things, that I don't win Miss Everything. I've never run for Miss Anything except Miscellaneous or Misinformation or something like that. But I really think just lack of confidence in myself has probably been my biggest stumbling block.
Well, in 1996, you were inducted into the Oklahoma Women's Hall of Fame.
Mm-hmm.
What was going through your mind when you were notified of this honor?
Who, me? Although, I had a little preview of that. In 1985 or 6, I'd have to go look on the plaque, because shame on me, I was given a special award by the Women's Hall of Fame as a media pioneer, and that startled the socks off of me, because Women's Hall of Fame was a little bit new then, and I remember that Mae Boren Axton was one of the inductees then, and I thought, oh wow. And one of our lady Supreme Court judges was an inductee that year, and I was going, oh my, what am I doing here? And then when they came up with this special award as a media pioneer, I was not inducted in the Women's Hall of Fame then. So I probably wasn't as startled by the Women's Hall of Fame thing as I would have been if that hadn't happened, if I hadn't had that 10 years prior to that time. Except I really, what is the old thing? I should get up here and tell you how humble I am, but I'm pleased as punch. That was kind of my reaction then. Everybody likes acceptance, don't we? I mean, I think we do, and that certainly was a show of acceptance, and I take it for that, not applause, not that, but we accept you for what you were able to do, and maybe it wasn't the greatest, but you did it well, whatever. It was just pleasant, but I was just pleased as punch.
Now, did you attend the ceremony?
Oh yes.
And did they have presenters back then? Where the person who nominated you would stand up and give the speech and make you feel all warm and fuzzy.
Warm and fuzzy. They didn't really have the people who nominated you, probably. George and I got up and said some awfully nice things, but he and I have been buddies forever. I mean, Yes, they did in a manner of speaking, but it wasn't necessarily the person's I have no idea who nominated me. I don't know that. But
So you remember who introduced you?
I'm sorry, say again.
You remember who introduced you?
I think it was George and I.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have a lot of supporters in attendance?
Oh yeah, oh yeah, oh yeah. They'd have. My family is always present every time I would get something, and they should be. They're part of they're my pushers. They're the wheels on my wagon. Gee. Mm.
What does this type of honor mean to you?
You know, when you're in public life, and by that I don't only mean the careers that you're paid for, but when you are a community volunteer, and everything I've done, whether I've been paid for it or whether I do it as a volunteer, has been a community-based effort. Television for me was an effort to promote my community and the organizations in it, or the people who came to town. But part of promoting them was that I wanted them to see how great Tulsa was. Of course, when you give public speaking, when you have public speaking engagements, those are always community-based, even though they may be in Oregon. This funny little lady from Oklahoma is here to talk to us today, or in New Jersey, because I've done this all over the world, or country, not world. But when you do those things, you expect people to like you, or they wouldn't ask you to do them. But my whole life has been community-based, really, promoting my community or people in it, in the community, and I think that's just a whole thrust for me. And so to be honored by anybody within the community is marvelous. Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you feel that now people look at you as a role model?
Boy, they're nuts. Well, I would like to think that I could be a good role model, and yet when I see some of the role models we have currently, I think, oh, no thank you. But I would like to think that I had somehow, and I haven't died yet, and I don't plan to for a while, but I would like to think that some of the values that I learned as a youngster somehow got so ingrained that they just lurch out. I want people to be polite to each other. I don't understand road rage. I don't understand people punching each other in the nose. I just grew up in too gentle an atmosphere, partly because it was all women. But I would like to think that anything that we do now in the way of manners and respecting the person and property of somebody else would somehow roll into being a role model for someone or several someones. I don't know that it will, but if that part of me, now there's part of me that I hope nobody follows, but I hope that those things that I grew up with and had pounded into me softly and gently and lovingly, I don't mean any other way, as just part of life. I just accepted that you were nice to each other because that was what life was all about. And I'd like for that to become a role model for somebody else. I don't know that it will.
Now, if you could give advice to your fellow Oklahomans, what would you tell them?
Stay here. Be proud of your state and where you are. I did a long time up at Channel 8, I did a whole series of public service announcements telling that the idea was to tell people how great this part of the state of Oklahoma is. I wasn't, and of course I think of the state as a whole as my playground, really. I mean, what's good for Tulsa ought to be good for Bug Tussle and everywhere else. Even though what I really was promoting was green country here in northeast Oklahoma. And I became even more entrenched by this wonderful state and its people. And of course, I think Oklahoma people are the secret to why Oklahoma has progressed as it has, really, and will either continue to or will not, depending on what its people continue to do or not. But I did this series of commercials or public service announcements out at Channel 8, they're all based on how great this state is. And I could only do that because I think that. I really honestly believe it, and I want other people to believe it enough that they want to stay here. People say, how do you keep your kids here? Well, I laugh and tell them I put a yo-yo string in the middle of their back, and when they talk about moving, I just give it a yank, but that's not true. The yank comes here. You live in a wonderful place that has all of the advantages, really. And if it doesn't, maybe you need to work a little harder to make sure some of those advantages happen. But my advice really would be just be proud of your state, stay here, make it even better.
We mentioned your family and your husband. Would you like to mention anyone who helped play an important role in your life?
Other than my family?
That you could include your family?
Well, all of my family. Even when we've had, as every family does, a few disappointments, those teach us, what is it? There is no sunshine without shadows. That's true. My mother and I were unusually close, probably because I didn't have a dad after I was a year old, and she didn't remarry, and she had no other children. Yeah, she had sisters and a mother, but we were really very, very close. So I would have to say, as corny as that may sound to some people, my mother was a huge influence on me, huge influence in my life. If I could be as good a public relations person as my mother was, I could have made $1 million. Various people who taught me things, both formally and informally, as teachers and just as friends, have taught me a lot and been a great influence on my life, and still will continue to be. Like I said, I haven't died yet. I've got a lot to learn yet. I couldn't name one without probably leaving out 100 important ones. So I'm not going to do that, but actually just this whole community of folks have helped me. I couldn't do it without them. And all the famous people that I have gotten to meet, and the unusual things that I have gotten to do, were only because of the job I had, and the reason I had that job was because the people let me keep it. If they hadn't liked me, I wouldn't have kept any job I've ever had. You don't do that in the jobs I've had. And so just people in general have been my support system, but my family in particular.
What does Oklahoma mean to you?
I'm sorry, say again?
What does Oklahoma mean to you?
Home. I think when we started this, I told you that I was born here and have always lived here and have always wanted to live here. I've never wanted to live somewhere else. So Oklahoma to me is home. It's where I'm comfortable. The state of Oklahoma offers me just exactly what I want as a base. Now, I travel all the time, and I still do. I get in my car and drive to Wisconsin every year. I drive to Florida every year. I love to travel, but I want to come home, and that's what this is. This is my comfort food. The state of Oklahoma is my comfort food. It's kind of like a big bowl of macaroni and cheese or pork chops and biscuits, or it's my comfort area. Opportunity, yeah. Who would have ever thought that a bashful little girl who was much too young to be in high school when she was there and was part of the wall, literally, could do the things that I've had the opportunity to do. This state let me do that, and the people in it. And I think they're wonderful.
Well, what's next on the agenda? What are you working on now?
Whatever comes along. I'm enjoying my school board work very much, and I have a few years left on my term. Probably will not run again because I am, after all, 83 years old at this point in my life, and while I have as much energy as most people much younger, I still, it's time to do something different. Also, I don't do anything for a real long time. Television is the longest I ever did anything, 25 years of that, and then 10 years at Career Tech as an employee, and 10 years in the legislature, and now I'm on several boards, Board of Health, Library Board, pick one. But I'm a worker in those. I don't just stick my name on them. I'm a worker in them, or I don't belong to them. So down the road, next is going to be a continuation of just what I'm doing, I'm sure. Trying to take care of myself and the most beautiful cat in town, and take care of my kiddos. Still want to travel some more. It's hard to live on Social Security and travel much, but I try to make it happen. Traveled all my life, even as a little bitty girl. And I like to do that, so I expect I'll have more of that in my future. And I'd still like to have a working job. You know of any available? I really would. I have always earned a living. I would, it seems funny not to, really. Not only seems funny, it seems a little binding when it's time to pay the bills.
Well, is there anything you would like to add that we have not spoken about today?
Oh, I don't. Good heavens, I've probably spoken about more than you ever wanted to know about me. But I don't think so. I just had a fun life, and I expect I've done about everything that I ought to be doing. So, so I didn't tell you about the real fun in my life.
Well, what's the real fun in your life?
Things like writing books, and things like landing on and catapulting off of an aircraft carrier. I haven't told you about those things.
Well, now I have in my notes that happened in 1969, the aircraft carrier. How did that come about?
I was a member of for 3 years, which is all you can be a member of the Defense Advisory Committee on Women in the Services. And they had taken they'd taken some military ladies to do this thing, but they decided they wanted to take 3 civilian women. So they picked a couple of gals. One was a journalist in Oklahoma City, and I've forgotten what the other one did, and they picked me. And we flew down to Texas, and then from Beeville, Texas, we took off in a prop jet plane and landed on the Lexington aircraft carrier in the Gulf of Mexico and catapulted off of it the next day. That was fun. We were the first 3 civilian women to do that. And, I never could have done that if I hadn't just by chance been appointed at that committee. And by chance, it was because of what I had done on television and in my community that I got to do that, and it was by chance that I got those jobs. When I stop and think about it, I've always been reasonably financially poor. Nobody ever had any money in my family ever, and I still don't. But I've been emotionally and psychologically and job-wise very, very rich accidentally, and it's pretty amazing to me. I mean, I think it's fun.
You mentioned about 5 minutes ago unusual things. What's the most unusual thing you've ever done? You alluded to it, but
the most unusual thing?
Sure. Unusual came out of your mouth, and I'm wondering, well, gee, what could possibly be so unusual?
Well, because I've always been so bashful, anything that has to do with adventure is very unusual for me to do. The aircraft thing, that I agreed to go do that, was kind of amazing to me, because that's kind of scary to catapult off one of those things and go from 0 to 200 miles an hour in 7 seconds. I mean, this is... One time I was at an event out at the fairgrounds for the March of Dimes, and I think they were called the Zany Olympics, and we had real nutty competition type stuff, and a fellow was changing a light bulb in the ceiling of that Expo Square building. Well, it's not the Expo Square building, it's the pavilion where they have used to have the horse shows and stuff. They don't anymore, but used to have. And he was changing a light bulb, and then he slid down on a rope from up there, and that was way, way up there, because that's a vaulted ceiling. It's very high. And he walked around, and I said, gosh, I just don't see how you do that. I see how you do it, but how did you learn to do it? How'd you have the nerve to learn to do that? And he said, oh, it's easy. He said, you want to try? So first of all, he tied me up to a rope and had me just go down from the box seat level down to the ground, which is probably just 10 feet or so. And he said, well, you do that pretty good. He said, you want to go up there and try? Well, I expect that the fair board would have had a convoluted heart attack if they had known this, but they didn't know this. So I said, sure. So, and I'm not this kind of a person, but I went up there with him, and we had to get out on the roof and then come in through the top of the building, and he hooked all this apparatus on me, and he said, now don't let go of this right hand. That is the most important thing. And there was a crew there from NBC filming our event that day, and I heard one of them holler, if she falls, keep rolling. CBS will buy it. I was working for ABC at the time. But that's probably one of the most unusual things I have ever done in my life. The aircraft carrier was another one. On the other end of the stick, having tea at the White House with the president, 2 or 3 presidents and their wives. Who ever thought I'd do this kind of thing? I'm just a little girl from Northwest Tulsa. I'm not doing it. So I've had lots of unusual experiences, but they've all been fun.
Well, that's good. Now, you did write 2 books.
Mm-hmm.
The first book was about Tulsa television. Is that correct?
No, that was the second one. I think people thought it was going to be an expose book, just because the tabloid mindset was just really coming on strong about then, and it was real funny when I had the party to announce the book and give it away to those who were in it. They all looked at it like, what has she said about me? Well, it's not that kind of a book at all. It's a fun book about people in the Tulsa media. It's not about me. It's about the people that everybody around here has known, and it was named If I Could Sing, I'd Be Dangerous. But that was my second published book. The first one was Travel Chatter in My Green Country and Beyond. I used to do a column every week in 30 Northeast Oklahoma newspapers, not in the Tulsa, because they didn't want to believe that anybody in television could write anything. So they didn't carry it here, but it was in the small weekly newspapers in all over Northeast Oklahoma. And I took a bunch of those and put them as a collection into the Travel Chatter book. My column was called Travel Chatter. So that was my first one, and had some of my photography in it. And then the second one was about people in Tulsa media and where are they now type book. And it was fun to do. I enjoyed that.
Any future book projects?
Well, I keep thinking up titles. I can think up the title, but then I have to have something in the middle. I've been kind of working on one about my mother's family from a fictional standpoint, and then I do books for all my kids at Christmas time. But it's just for my family. But I did a family memory book, which I wish everybody would do. I think genealogy is nice to know who begat who, but it's even nicer if you tell your kids something about the funny things, the sad things, the unusual things, the ordinary things that happened throughout your life. Because some of these days somebody's going to want to know, well, how did Grandma get interested in, like you're asking me now? So I do a memory book for them, and then this last year I did because all my family were good cooks, I did a family cookbook, Fine Foods from the Fairchild Gang. My mother's maiden name was Fairchild. And with all these sisters and all being wonderful cooks, except for one whose favorite recipe is to open a can of Camel's tomato soup, add water, stir, and eat. That's her favorite recipe. But so I still do family type things, but I'll get around to it. I keep busy trying to do other things and just don't get around to it. But I think of lots of titles.
Well, we do appreciate you taking time out to speak with us for our oral history project.
I appreciate the fact that you're even interested in the old gal. That is unusual to me, and I appreciate it.
Well, thank you very much.